Well, good morning. Thank you, Lisa. So sweet to have you back with us and all of our wonderful musicians that we have here. It's just great. Paul, Denny, Michael. And I am very happy to have another opportunity to talk with you today. And, of course, as you know, we have been talking about abundance all of this month, and I get to finish it off today. And Ernest Holmes, our founder, said that money is the greatest medium of exchange that the human race has produced. Now, we know that everything in the material world started in the spiritual. And so, therefore, we know that money is indeed a spiritual idea. So today I want to talk with you about how we can bring that spiritual idea into hard cash and how we can expand our enjoyment of life as we do so, because that's really what we're here for. Okay? How many of you were ever told when you were growing up that money doesn't grow on trees? Okay, well, I certainly heard it quite a bit. But I'll tell you, for me, I thought that money grew on cotton stalks. Because I grew up on a farm in West Tennessee, as most of you know, and we raised cotton. And I did all kinds of chores on the farm from my earliest memories. But the only one that I ever got paid for was picking cotton. And so I considered that by picking this cotton, I could convert that into actual cash. Now, in those days, all cotton was picked by hand. And just about all the able-bodied people I knew picked cotton. Now, we started school in the middle of the summer so that we would be able to dismiss school for 6 weeks, and all the students and most of the teachers would go out and pick cotton. And so it was a very joyous time. However, I grew up on the farm, as I said. So as soon as I was old enough, I was involved in planting the cotton. First of all, preparing the soil, and then planting the cotton, and watching with my dad to see the first signs of that cotton coming up out of the ground. And then we would take care of it, cut the weeds out, the grass out, and plow it and watch it every week and sort of celebrate the growth that was taking place. Now, after about 5 or 6 months of this, each individual cotton plant would produce about 20 or 30 bowls of cotton. Now, I don't know how many of you know what a bowl of cotton looks like, but we're having a little show and tell today. And so these are some bowls of cotton that I was able to pick up from our family farm in West Tennessee. And so what I was not aware of at that time in my life is that I was participating and living the most common metaphor for the creative process that we study in religious science. Because we planted the seed. Now those seeds are small, but they're right here. And here's one of those seeds I'm about to take out here, a tiny little seed. And the seed had everything in it that was necessary for producing the cotton plant. We might say that the seed was Spirit's idea for a cotton plant. And what we did in watching it and nurturing the growth of the plants was what we considered to be the subjective mind. You know, in the creative process, many of you have studied this, and we know that we start with spirit, and then we put that idea into the universal mind or the growth medium. And so that's where we all were. And then, finally, we saw the end result of this when we had a field of cotton. Now, when we planted those seeds, we were putting our intention out to have fields of cotton that we could harvest and convert into money. Now, the universe provided really just about everything. The universe provided the water. It provided the warmth. It provided the sunlight for photosynthesis. And all of this was really what was making it happen. We were just sort of doing our little thing to assist it in coming forth. Now, interestingly, it was not just a matter of cotton being produced, which was really what we used and what we sold, but each bowl of cotton contained several seeds that we could use for the next year's crop. And my dad would always save the seeds to plant them again the following year. This I see as a perfect example of spiritual substance being converted into material form. Now, in every major thing that I have desired in my life, I have planted a nucleus or a seed for that thing and entered that nucleus into the law. And it would bring forth my desire. But I didn't get to watch it happening the way I watched the cotton come up and grow and develop. But nonetheless, it happened the same way. And that's what every one of us can do, because every one of us is imbued with that spiritual substance. And we can bring it into manifestation in the same way of following the creative process. Now, the creative process certainly involves faith. And some people say, well, I don't have much faith. Well, everybody has faith. And if you don't feel that you have enough faith, you can develop it. Because Ernest Holmes tells us that we can strengthen our faith. And we can use that faith in the creative process. And we can use that faith to support spiritual mind treatments. Now, my dad had a lot of faith when he was planting those seeds of cotton. And even more, later on in the year, he would start preparing the wagons to take the cotton off to the gin before we ever saw a bowl of cotton. And he would prepare our cotton sacks for us so that when we were picking, we could fill them up. Now, I thought then, and I think my dad probably said this because he was a good Baptist, and that this was faith in God. Nowadays, I see it differently. I say that this was faith of God because I realize that every one of us is an individualization of that infinite divine spirit. And so we have that quality. We have that faith. We have that spiritual substance within each of us just waiting to be converted into what we want. I've got to see what I'm supposed to be doing next year. Okay. Eric Butterworth was a great writer, and he's written a book called Spiritual Economics, which is widely read in religious science circles. And in his book, he mentions the great, successful, wealthy movie maker Mike Todd. And Mike Todd said, "I have often been broke, but I have never been poor." Now, I don't know, that may have been because Mike Todd was married to Elizabeth Taylor, but I like to think that it was because he had a consciousness of prosperity. He had a consciousness of prosperity. I can relate to that myself because I've been broke. I've been worse than broke. I've been not having any money and owed money. But I knew that I wasn't going to stay there. That was not where I was going to pitch my tent. And I believe that this consciousness of prosperity is available for every one of us. And that's what Mike Todd was talking about. And we can all have that consciousness of prosperity. However, Kennedy Schultz, who's another significant religious science minister, said that the majority of people have a consciousness of poverty or lack. And I'll tell you right now that I do not believe that consciousness of lack or poverty have any place at all in the consciousness of certainly of religious scientists, and I would say that's true for everyone as well, because we're not all that special. Okay? Now, Raymond Charles Barker, who was an outstanding writer and religious science minister. Raymond Charles Barker wrote a book called Treat Yourself to Life. And in one of those chapters, which was called Treat Yourself to Wealth, he says that money is not prosperity. Prosperity produces money, and we can feel prosperous when we have money, but prosperity is not money. He defines prosperity as being able to do whatever you want to do, when you want to do it, now, not in the past, but when you want to do it now. And I think we probably all know people who are prosperous and don't have any money at all. I think I see them around all the time. He says prosperity is an action of God. It's the natural state of anyone who is able to think in larger terms. If we sell ourselves on money as a spiritual idea, then it becomes part of our subconscious mind, automatic for us. He says through science of mind treatment that we can establish patterns of prosperity that are just as significant, just as strong as any patterns of lack that we may possibly have had at an earlier time. Now we know, and he says as well, that science of mind treatment requires faith. And so that takes us back to faith again. Now, Eric Butterworth says that faith, and he speaks very clearly about faith, that faith turns on and tunes in the divine flow that has always been here for all of us. It is a positive action of turning on. But he also says that faith is a believing attitude from rather than in. There again, it's talking about what we have within us. Now, Ernest Holmes, of course, says, as I mentioned earlier, that our faith can be strengthened and that it makes our science of mind treatments much more powerful as tools to use in our lives. Now, we do know that some people have a reluctance to treat for money. We feel more comfortable treating for what we want to use the money for, or how we want to feel when we use the money. Ernest Holmes didn't have any problem with that. Ernest Holmes was okay treating for a specific amount of money. And you know, last week, those of us who were in Reverend Ed Ween's workshop learned that she doesn't have any problem treating for certain amounts of money either. Now, one time, when they were building the Founders Church in Southern California, they were $180,000 from reaching their goal. And so Ernest Holmes told his friend, Dr. George Bendel, he said, I'm going to treat for $180,000. And 1 week later, he had a check for $180,000. I don't know how he got it, but he got it, okay? Now, Ernest was known as a very generous man. He knew that prosperity consciousness included the law of circulation. He knew, like we know, that a clenched fist, unlike an open hand, can neither give nor receive. In other words, cheerful giving and cheerful receiving go together. Now, how do we manifest our money today? Now, we don't pick cotton anymore because now all the cotton is picked by machines. So that's not a job that's open for us anymore. But most of us have worked, or we do work, for wages. And it's very important that we enjoy the work that we do. You know, Reverend Ed Ween last week said, if you're not enjoying your work, you have somebody else's job. And I have often heard, do what you love and the money will follow. And sometimes that's easier said than done. But again, sometimes, there are negative feelings about money. Now, money does not have a mind of its own. And I know that none of us have ever used money unwisely, but I bet every one of us knows somebody who has. And so if we are treating for money, I think it's probably a good idea for us to add, and the wisdom to use it wisely. Okay? Now, in his book, in his chapter, Treat Yourself to Wealth, Dr. Barker talks about a man from his congregation whose name was Ned. And Ned came to him because he didn't feel that he had a good enough job. He had stayed in the same boring job for years because it provided him with enough money to support his family. But as his family was growing up and his son was getting ready to go to college, he didn't have enough money. And so he had come to Dr. Barker in his big church in New York City to see what he could do about it. And Dr. Barker said, "What have you always wanted to do with your life? What have you always wanted to do with your life?" And he said, "I've always wanted to be a sports fisherman." And to make a long story short, 3 years later, Ned owned a fleet of fishing boats, and he had a very impressive annual income, more than enough to meet the needs of his son going to college and the two daughters who were coming up and getting ready to go. Now, what Ned did was change his consciousness from a consciousness of lack or poverty into a consciousness of prosperity. He started focusing on what he wanted in his life, not what he didn't want. And Dr. Barker tells us that we should treat ourselves, not our income sources, but treat ourselves. And as we treat ourselves, we are able to move into a prosperity consciousness. We can establish by daily spiritual mind treatment, daily affirmations, we can establish a consciousness of prosperity and get rid of any consciousness of lack that we may have. Now, in my own life, as many of you know, I was a high school biology teacher for over 30 years. Now, I knew that I wasn't going to get rich doing that. But, and I didn't, of course. But I did have a prosperous consciousness because I was doing what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. Most days, and I'm not going to say every day, but most days that included getting up and going to work because I enjoyed it. I had had other jobs, but they didn't have the joy that I got from teaching the students. Now, I have known people, and I'm sure many of you have as well, and many of you probably have done it, who have left a higher paying job for a lower paying job that provided the joy that they were seeking. Now, sometimes we don't need to change jobs. Sometimes we just need to look at the job we have a little differently and look for the good things. Make a list of all the positive things in the job that we have. And in that way, we can have this consciousness of prosperity without having to give up a particular job, because it's very, sometimes that's very challenging. So anyway, to recap, as individualizations of the divine spirit, a consciousness of poverty or lack has no place in our lives. Prosperity consciousness includes both receiving and giving, the law of circulation. And finally, we deserve to enjoy the way we earn our living. Now, in closing, I would like to share with you a treatment from Dr. Barker's book, and I've taken the liberty of changing it just a little bit. So I invite you just to close your eyes and allow this treatment to be yours if you so choose. There's only one creative cause, God. There's only one mind, God. There's only one life, God. There's only one substance, God. This present universe is the glory of God. It is a moving, flexible, fluidic creation. It is alive with life, with abundance, and the richness of God. I abide in its prosperity and richness. Mine created me in order that it might act through me. Therefore, I am receptive to its abundance. I am receptive to its circulation in my life in every perfect way, including in the form of money. Money, being God in action, is absolute good. It is wholeness. It is a blessing to me, and I am now prospered with it. I have no fear of lack, for I believe that I have plenty of money. I am grateful for this truth of my life, and I lovingly release my word of acceptance into the divine action of the law. And so it is. And so it is.